truly our civilization. That is our modern industrial society that we all enjoy. We use every day, no matter how green or alternative we are. I drove my car to come here. Chances are, you guys, when you go home, you switch on electric light. Well, that is going to collapse this century. That's certain. And I'll just say that. Now, it'll almost certainly happen in our lifetimes, okay, self-included, and most likely it's actually going to happen in the next few years or decades. What's not certain is how that collapse will occur, and how quick that's going to happen, and what the consequences of that are, and that depends on, of course, what we do. So it could be a soft landing, where our economy, our society gets reordered, new technology utilised for a fairer, cleaner, and a better life for all of us. Actually, our life could improve. That's fantastic. After some painful adjustments, we can't avoid that. I'll get into that later. Or it could be a hard landing. We could be in for a hard landing with water and food shortages, with natural disasters never before seen by humans. That's not experienced in 200,000 years. Famine, mass migration, war and conflict all around the globe. Now that's a real possibility, and that's why, a little bit about myself. My name's Gus Johnson. I work for Max Bumble, the organiser of this event, in bush regeneration. I'm also a massage therapist and healer in that line of work. But I used to work in hospitals. I was a hospital manager, and I was involved in national standards and state policy development. This was my passion. I had been studying law and economics years earlier at Sydney University. I was on the Students' Representative Council with Joe Hockey. Now, he's been a minister and now the Shadow Treasurer. I don't recommend him as a great example, but it was a good experience. I was a Media and Public Relations Officer for the SRC in 1987 and Industrial Relations Officer. I wanted to make changes, but I didn't know what to do, and really, my own life was in disarray. I think I had to get some things straight. I went back to university years later and did a degree in health. I thought, health is a way I can help people, I can do something positive. My undergraduate degree was in research, and I became a health statistician in hospitals. I managed 20 people, a budget of $1 million, advised people on standards and quality in the hospital system, but I felt really frustrated. When I was involved in policy development, Standards Australia, I felt there's so much running against not just me. Sure, I was probably, thought I could change the world, as a young person. Probably a lot of people get that sense about that. But also anyone else trying to change things. Even someone so high and so powerful as the previous Director General of Health, John Menadue, and the Menadue Report. I notice all those reports, they just get shelved. Nothing happens about moving away from really expensive high-tech medicine, moving into public health, prevention of disease, eating more healthily, changing the way we advertise and we structure our food system. Even the food in hospitals. Rubbish, and I wrote something called the brown bread email that became viral and became infamous and synonymous, and it really made me realise my career was over. When in my hospital, I was Deputy Health Information Manager at Orange-based hospital and the Orange Health Service up there, and I sent Orange, and beautiful people at Orange Ag College up there doing organic, and I know all those sorts of things, but and my hospital cancelled brown bread, and it was just a symbol of how we're not thinking. White bread has all the nutrients, or I won't say all, but I will say a part, the majority of all the nutrients removed, because it's in the nutrients in bread is actually in that kernel, not in the starch. So anyway, I copped a lot of flack over the brown bread email. Okay, stir the pot. That's right. So this is not an optimistic talk, and I want to apologise for that, because that can offend a lot of people. Because our tendency is to soften the reality, it's to keep everyone in the dark and the ignorance, and we want to feel comfortable and chill, And it's good to lay back, but it's also good to know what is really happening. I'm also I don't want to be pessimistic. That's also a danger in our sort of way of thinking. We can give into exaggeration, and our traditions, our ancient traditions, really embedded in our DNA of moralistic tendencies towards apocalypse. The world is ending, and and this sort of thing. And Jesus will come back on the cloud, you know. That's always there. So I'm trying to be in the philosophical tradition of the ancient classicists, the European Enlightenment, and modern rational science. To be honest assessment of where we are today, how we got here, and how we might prevent, avoid, and, in fact, we'll have to solve some of the hard realities and challenges that we're going to encounter. So in this spirit, I ask everyone to take a deep breath, honour your pain for the world, as John Seed, my workshop predecessor, has taught. Hold on to your vision of a better, fairer, cleaner world, and for just an hour, or now more like 40 minutes, come on this journey with me. So in the words of two wise, if not perfect, emperors of the world's greatest empires, past and present, John F. Kennedy said, "The great enemy of truth is the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Belief in myths allows the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." And Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome in the 2nd century, "If anyone can show me and prove to me that I am wrong in thought or deed, I will gladly change." What a great attitude. Richard Dawkins also talks about his professor when he was studying. Richard Dawkins, the author of The God Delusion, probably the greatest living biologist today. Marcus Aurelius shares a story about his professor saying something very similar. The whole lecture hall stood up. What happened was his professor had just been, a visiting professor had just destroyed his theory that he'd built up over years and decades and written about and done so much research on. And the professor rose up and said, "Thank you for correcting me. I've been wrong all these years. I'm so grateful to now know where we stand on that." And the lecture hall, you could put yourself there, they rose as one in just clapping, and there were tears. That truth and that, honesty that just came right through. It's incredible to see. Aurelius goes on to say, "I seek the truth, which never hurt anybody. It is only persistence in self-delusion and ignorance which does harm. I do that which is my duty to do. Nothing else distracts me." Some people will know Marcus Aurelius as the wise old emperor in the movie Gladiator, that passed on his mantle to the Russell Crowe actor as he was dying on the battlefield, which is true, which really happened. And Comulus, his son, of course, took over. It's not true that he tried to pass it on to that general, but it's true that he died and certainly did try to avoid passing it on to his son. So, in that spirit, we just try to. It's the Enlightenment that tries to get to the truth. So I'm going to start with talking about the European honeybees, partly in homage to this event's founder, Bumble, my mate Max, but also as it illustrates that a prosperous society sustained by its food could quite quickly unravel, even to return to states of biblical famine. Honeybees fertilise 80 to 90% of our non-cereal crops, that is, seed, nuts, legumes, fruit and vegetables. So that's here in Australia and all around the world. Moths and butterflies can fertilise some fruit and vegetables, etc., but they can't penetrate large orchards, fields, and they don't fertilise all the food that we eat. Native bees, surprising to know, Australian native bees don't fertilise crops, unfortunately. So European honeybees are responsible for 35% of the calories we eat, but more importantly, they're responsible for most of the vitamins, minerals and antioxidants that aren't in those grains. So consider now the phenomenon known as colony collapse disorder, CCD. Now that's widespread across the temperate, cooler latitudes, the food bowls, that is, of the Northern Hemisphere. Traditionally, who? Bayer. Right. Traditionally, bee colonies die off in the winter cold. Usually that's around 10%. Now this die-off has been rising. It's now around 35% in North America and 20% in Europe and Asia. And even in South America it's spread to. Now climate change plays a role with this, with more extreme variations in temperature, extreme weather conditions and events that can kill bees in the winter. But the effect of this is global. Climate change, of course, will affect honeybees in Australia. We have to look at the United States, where colony collapse disorder is twice that of Europe. honeybees, fertilised farm output has quadrupled since 1960, but bee colonies have halved. Isn't that extraordinary? So we've got less bees, we've got half as many bees fertilising 4 times as many crops. Okay? Now, fewer bees, more production. When this ratio hits critical limit, the bees can no longer do it. They just can't keep up. You have a collapse in food production and no one knows where that point is, but that's no reason to postpone action now, but we are. Pesticide use, as my learned friend correctly pointed out, is probably the main cause of colony collapse disorder. Europe has banned many of the pesticides that are implicated, but the United States hasn't, and Australia is somewhere in between the two. We can say it's really not good enough. Albert Einstein warned, if the bee disappears from the surface of the earth, man will have no more than 40 years to live. Now, Einstein wasn't always right, but it makes you really sit up and take notice, doesn't it, about our food security, what we're eating. Now, as an example of this is not just pie in the sky, this is real. In Sichuan province in China, due to the excessive pesticide use, fruit orchards are now pollinated by hand. They do. That's right, a feather duster. They get a feather duster and go through all the fruit trees and spread the pollen like that. You have to pay someone to do it. Isn't that just outrageous? The bees are gone and they haven't come back. Now, grasses produce grains, cereals such as corn, oats, wheat, rice, barley, rye, etc. These are wind-pollinated and supply more than half the world's calories, right? But grain production is highly vulnerable to intense heat. A study in the Philippines on rice showed that at 35 degrees Celsius, 100% of fertilisation occurs of the rice. You just increase that to 40 degrees Celsius, not an unreasonable or outrageous temperature, we've all experienced 40 degrees, you get no fertilisation of rice. And corn too is highly vulnerable to intense heat. Now, we're already committed to 2 degrees higher temperature. There's really nothing we can do about that. Scientists have a consensus on that. And that's by at least 2050, maybe earlier. But scientists believe climate change is moving much faster than their models even predicted, to that frightening level. Perhaps it could be 5 or 6 degrees hotter by mid-century in many places, with food crops failing. Scientists could come up with genetically modified crops and new hybrids that withstand the heat. Not that we'd want to inflict that sort of, test tube experiment on our whole planet. But we haven't even spoken of the key problems of soil degradation, freshwater shortages, destabilised states, war, mass migration, likely to follow such a rise in temperature. We haven't even mentioned peak oil and fertiliser depletion. And just in case you think that animal or meat products might be an answer to our calorie needs, it takes 10 times more water, energy, land, and vegetable crops themselves to make an equivalent calorie of meat. It's no answer. In fact, it's part of the problem. As outlined by Professor Ross Garnaut in the Garnaut report to the Australian government. We've got to get out, we've got to reduce our meat consumption, and at least get into eating kangaroos, which don't create a climate change problem. That's right. Professor Stephen LeBlanc, anthropologist at Harvard University's Peabody Museum, has looked at all the great past civilizations prior to our presently Neo-Roman industrial civilization. In all cases, all civilizations, you can't find a single exception. They declined over a period of 50 to 100 years following an explosion of the population and then a shortage of